Good afternoon. Thank you for joining today's Tea Party Patriots Lunch Break Live. I'm Jenny Beth Martin with Tea Party Patriots Action. In just a moment, we'll go to Bill Pasco for our Washington Report. Before we do that, please take a moment to like this Facebook Live session and share it with your friends on Facebook so that they can get the Washington Report and most importantly, so they can get the calls to action for the week. So go ahead and press that share button now. After Bill goes through the Washington Report, we will go to our call to action. Also, if you have any questions during the Washington Report, just shoot them over to me by email, jenny.beth@teapartypatriots.org, and we'll ask those of Bill after he finishes the Washington Report. Okay, Bill, this is Bill Pasco, our man in Washington with the Washington Report.
Thank you, Jenny Beth. The House and Senate are now in recess for the 4th of July break and will not return until Monday, July 10. Last week in the House came back last Tuesday and voted to pass two bills under suspension of the rules. On Wednesday, the House voted for the rule to govern floor consideration of H.R. 3564, the Middle Class Borrower Protection Act, H.R. 3799, the Choice Arrangement Act, and H.Res. 461, condemning the use of elementary and secondary school facilities to provide shelter for aliens who are not admitted to the United States. Then the House took up and rejected a motion to table H.Res. 521, a resolution censuring Representative Adam Schiff. Then the House tried to override the President's veto of H.J.Res. 45. That's the Congressional Review Act resolution of disapproval regarding the President's student loan debt bailout scam. The veto override attempt failed. Then the House took up H.R. 3799, the Choice Arrangement Act. Choice, in this case, is actually an acronym. It stands for Custom Health Option and Individual Care Expense. The Choice Arrangement Act would codify a 2019 Trump administration rule to allow employers to provide tax-advantaged funds to their employees to purchase qualified medical expenses. After considering three amendments, two of which were adopted, the House voted by 220 to 209 to pass the bill. Then the House took up H.Res. 521, censuring Representative Adam Schiff, Democrat of California, and passed the resolution by a vote of 213 to 209, with the 6 Republican members of the House Ethics Committee voting present. On Thursday, the House took up H.Res. 529, a rule that would refer H.Res. 503, Representative Lauren Boebert's resolution impeaching President Biden for his failure properly to secure the southern border, to the Committee on Homeland Security and the Committee on the Judiciary. It passed by a vote of 219 to 208. Then the House took up and passed H.Res. 461, condemning the use of elementary and secondary school facilities to provide shelter for aliens who are not admitted to the United States. On Friday, the House took up H.R. 3564, the Middle Class Borrowers Protection Act. That's a bill that would eliminate the Biden administration's new tax on creditworthy homebuyers to subsidize those with riskier loans. After rejecting one amendment, the House passed the measure by a vote of 230 to 189, with 14 Democrats crossing party lines to vote with the Republicans and no Republicans crossing party lines to vote with the Democrats. And then they were done. Last week in the Senate came back to work on Tuesday and voted to confirm the nomination of Julie Reichelman to be U.S. Circuit Judge for the First Circuit Court of Appeals. On Wednesday, the Senate failed to override a presidential veto of the Congressional Review Act resolution of disapproval of the rule submitted by the Environmental Protection Agency relating to control of air pollution from new motor vehicles, heavy-duty engine and vehicle standards. The veto was sustained by a vote of 50 to 50. Then the Senate voted to invoke cloture on and then to confirm the nomination of Natasha C. Murrell to be U.S. District Judge for the Eastern District of New York. Then the Senate voted to invoke cloture on the treaty document 112-8, the tax convention with Chile. On Thursday, the Senate voted to reject H-Res 44, a CRA resolution of disapproval of the rule submitted by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives relating to factoring criteria for firearms with attached stabilizing braces. The resolution was rejected by a vote of 49 to 50. Then the Senate voted to ratify Treaty Document 112-8, the tax convention with Chile. And then they were done. Now let's talk about the funding fight to come. On Thursday of last week, the Senate Appropriations Committee advanced its fiscal year 2024 spending plan. In doing so, it set up a fight with the House Appropriations Committee that could lead to a temporary partial government shutdown later this year. The Democrats who run the Senate and therefore run all the committees set the overall spending levels for FY 2024 discretionary spending at $1.59 trillion. That's the level that was agreed to in the debt ceiling deal struck by President Biden and House Speaker McCarthy. The House Appropriations Committee, by contrast, set spending levels for FY 2024 a week earlier. When they did so, they chose to go lower than the $1.59 trillion number agreed to by Biden and McCarthy. Said House Appropriations Committee Chairwoman Kay Granger, quote, "While the Fiscal Responsibility Act set the top-line spending levels, it does not require that we mark up our bills to that level. Simply put, the debt ceiling bill set a ceiling, not a floor, for fiscal year 2024 bills. The allocations before us reflect the change members on my side of the aisle want to see by returning spending to responsible levels. They also fulfill our commitment to focus our limited resources on the core responsibilities of the federal government," end quote. House Republican leaders agreed to the lower spending levels under pressure from conservatives in the House Freedom Caucus. So the stage is now set. The House Republican leadership is determined to pass 12 individual spending bills, one at a time, with lower levels than agreed to in the debt ceiling deal. The Senate isn't in any rush to pass individual spending bills. The Senate likes to fund government by means of a giant omnibus bill at the end of the year because it's much easier to hide ridiculous spending programs in a 3,000-page bill. So it's an open question at this point whether the Senate will even attempt to pass a single spending bill, let alone all 12. If the two sides do not agree on individual spending bills and still haven't agreed on spending levels by January 1, then under the terms of the debt ceiling deal and the Fiscal Responsibility Act, a continuing resolution with funding levels set at 1% less than last year's funding levels will go into effect. So both sides have an incentive to move toward a negotiated resolution. More on that Chinese spy base in Cuba. When last we spoke, we discussed the revelation that for the last several years, China has been running a surveillance operation directed at the southeastern United States from a base in Cuba. On Tuesday, June 20th, the Wall Street Journal updated its reporting by revealing that not only is China surveilling communications in the southeastern U.S. from Cuba, it's currently negotiating with Cuba to establish a joint military training facility on the island. That could result in China stationing thousands of troops less than 100 miles from U.S. territory. The journal says U.S. intelligence reports indicate that the talks are in an advanced stage but have not yet concluded. China and Cuba already jointly manage 4 separate electronic eavesdropping stations on the island. That network was upgraded from the one original site in 2019 to 4 different sites. More on the Durham report. On Tuesday, June 20, Special Counsel John Durham sat for several hours of testimony in a closed session with the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. Then, the next day, he sat in front of the House Judiciary Committee for a public session. These 2 sessions with House committees represent the first time he has testified since he released his report last month. Republican and Democrat leaders of the House Intelligence Committee agreed that Durham's testimony bolstered the case for significant reform of the FBI and for tougher oversight of the FBI by the Congress. They look to the upcoming reauthorization of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act as a prime opportunity to make changes. The hearings before the Judiciary Committee on Wednesday was a different matter entirely. The only sense of bipartisanship was the fact that partisans on both sides reveled in attacking Durham. Democrat Adam Schiff of California, who had led the Democrats' attempt to impeach and remove President Donald Trump, attacked Durham for allegedly carrying water for Trump, while Trump allies on the committee attacked Durham for allegedly carrying water for the FBI establishment. More on the Trump federal indictment. On Tuesday of last week, Judge Eileen Cannon, who is overseeing the federal case against Donald Trump, set a trial date for August 14. That was seen as an extremely ambitious proposed schedule given the nature of what's at stake in this case. With 31 of the 37 counts involving classified documents and the need for defense attorneys to receive clearances to read the documents that will be at issue, trying to get a trial started by August 14 would be no small feat. Consequently, it surprised no one when Special Counsel Jack Smith on Friday filed multiple requests with Judge Cannon, including a motion to move the trial date to December 11. I would not be at all surprised if this trial doesn't even begin until after the November 2024 election. Now to the latest on the Biden crime family saga. 2 weeks ago, on Monday, June 12, Iowa Republican Senator Charles Grassley went to the floor of the Senate to make a statement, and it was a doozy. Grassley revealed that, according to the confidential human source who had claimed that he had been told that a senior executive of a Ukrainian energy company had bribed both Joe and Hunter Biden for $5 million apiece, that senior executive claimed to have audio recordings of conversations with both Bidens. Specifically, 15 audio recordings of conversations with Hunter and another 2 recordings of conversations he had with Joe. He had recorded the conversations as what Grassley described as sort of an insurance policy. No one knows what that means. We don't know if the recordings ever really existed, and we don't know if they exist today. We don't know if the executive who claims to have made the recordings has kept them. We don't know if anyone in the U.S. government has ever verified their existence or listened to them. To make matters more interesting, Grassley revealed the claim about the audio recordings was contained in the FBI FD 1023 form that memorialized the tip from the confidential human source about the 2 $5 million bribes, but which, Grassley revealed, had been redacted from the version of the document that had finally, under pressure, been shared by the FBI with the House Oversight Committee. That is, when FBI Director Chris Wray finally agreed to share the document with the House Committee, he redacted a rather significant portion of that document. Not surprisingly, the claim that there are audio recordings rocketed across Washington and stirred demand among allies of former President Trump for answers on the seemingly never-ending Hunter Biden investigation. Those demands for action were answered to an extent 8 days later, when the United States Attorney for Delaware, David Weiss, informed the court that Hunter Biden had agreed to plead guilty to 2 charges of willful failure to pay taxes and to enter a diversion program for a gun-related charge. The 2 tax charges are misdemeanors. The diversion program for the gun-related charge means that he will likely avoid a prison sentence. Critics immediately cried foul, claiming that Hunter got a sweetheart deal, preferential treatment that came his way only because he's a Biden. The critics' argument was bolstered Thursday when House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Jason Smith, whose committee had taken testimony late last month from 2 IRS whistleblowers regarding the Hunter Biden investigation, released the hundreds of pages of their testimony. The 2 IRS whistleblowers, including Senior Supervisory Agent Gary Shapley, who had outed himself publicly earlier, and a second member of the investigative team who wishes to maintain his anonymity, claimed that Hunter had received preferential treatment and that both the IRS and the DOJ had taken extraordinary steps to shield him from more serious prosecution. They offered specific charges, including claims that Hunter had illegally claimed as business deductions monies he had paid to prostitutes, including airfare travel expenses to bring them to him, and that senior DOJ officials had rejected the possibility of obtaining a warrant to search Joe Biden's guest house, where Hunter had been living, because the, quote, optics, unquote, would be bad. Moreover, senior DOJ officials tipped off Hunter's lawyers about the possibility of an upcoming search of a storage unit, so that by the time IRS agents could search the premises, Hunter would have been able to move the records in question. The whistleblowers claim that the IRS Criminal Investigations Division personnel assigned to the case agreed that Hunter should be charged with felony tax evasion charges for 3 years' worth of filings, and should also be charged for several years' worth of filing false returns. Further, we've now seen a WhatsApp message from Hunter to a Chinese business partner in which Hunter says he's sitting there with his father, and they both want to know why a commitment made has not been met. In the message, Hunter threatens the business associate. It reads like something out of The Sopranos. In addition, and more importantly, the whistleblowers claim that U.S. Attorney Weiss told them that he had tried to file felony charges against Hunter in California, but had been turned down by the U.S. Attorney there, and had then asked to be made a special counsel, but had been rejected by his DOJ superiors. Weiss, according to the whistleblowers, had told them he had then tried to bring felony charges in the District of Columbia, but had again been rejected. If these claims are true, they contradict the sworn congressional testimony of Attorney General Merrick Garland, who testified that Weiss had been told he could have anything he wanted. Hunter Biden's next stop will be in court, where he's expected on July 26th. And that's our Washington report for this week.
Bill, thank you so much for that Washington report. And now we do have one question, so I'm going to read that off my phone because it was sent to us by email. So bear with me as I'm looking at my phone. Donald Trump, Joe Biden, and Mike Pence were all found to be in possession of classified documents. How is it fair that President Trump is the only one who got indicted for it? Why do Biden and Pence get off scot-free?
Oh, great question. Why does Donald Trump get indicted for having classified documents in his possession after he left the White House, but Joe Biden and Mike Pence didn't? I would actually add, and let's not forget that Donald Trump was president of the United States, which gives him the power to declassify documents, and which he claimed at some point along the way. We haven't seen this as part of his formal defense. His formal defense hasn't been presented yet. But there was talk over the last several months that he had declassified the documents that he took with him to Mar-a-Lago. And of course, because they served as vice president, neither Joe Biden nor Mike Pence has the power to declassify documents. Now, never-Trumpers will tell you, oh, of course there's a huge difference. The reason Trump got indicted was because he refused to return the documents once it was brought to his attention that he was in possession of documents that he shouldn't have been in possession of. And that, Biden and Pence immediately, they called up the National Archives and Records Administration. They said, oh, so sorry, I've got documents that I shouldn't have. Please come get them from me. Here's the problem with that. The Espionage Act, which is the law that President Trump is charged with violating on 31 different counts, and that's one count for each of 31 different documents. So President Trump is charged with violating the Espionage Act 31 different times. The Espionage Act doesn't say anything about intent or motive. It doesn't say he had to want to keep the documents. It simply says possession. If you are in possession of these documents outside a secure area, then you are in violation of the statute. And Pence and Biden clearly were in possession of the documents in question when they shouldn't have been. And by that standard, they should similarly be charged with the same violations. What the special counsel probably should have done, if you wanted a much cleaner, certainly politically cleaner prosecution, he should have stuck with the obstruction of justice charges. That is, that goes to when it was found, when the National Archives and Records Administration found what they believed to be classified materials in boxes that had been shipped from Mar-a-Lago, that's when they got in touch with the FBI, according to the narrative that we've been given. At that point, they began to seek the retrieval of classified documents. Once the FBI got involved, they get very worried about classified documents being hither and yon, that is, being in places that they're not supposed to be. They're supposed to be in secure facilities. So They impaneled a grand jury, and they went to the grand jury and they said, we would like you to authorize a subpoena that we can issue to Donald Trump for the return of all these documents that we believe he has that he's not supposed to have. And at that point, it becomes a process thing, kind of like if you'll remember in the Mueller investigation, we spent years of the taxpayers' time and tens of millions of dollars of the taxpayers' time to find absolutely nothing down the Russia collusion rabbit hole. And yet, along the way, there were several people charged for process crimes, for lying to investigators. That is, it's a crime that never would have occurred if it hadn't been for the fact of the investigation itself. Well, in this case, the six charges with which President Trump has been charged that don't have anything to do with the 31 documents that he's supposedly in possession of wrongly. The six different charges have to do with the obstruction of justice because they say, well, he failed to respond properly to the subpoena, and he hid things, and he conspired to hide things. And that wouldn't have happened. None of that would have happened, and therefore none of those charges would have ever been leveled against him if it hadn't been for the initial decision to come after him for the documents. Look, what we've got here, and this goes to, let's bring in Hunter Biden as well. The IRS whistleblowers making the claim that Hunter Biden is receiving special treatment because his last name is Biden and not Cunningham or Johnson or Hargrove or something like that. They're pointing out that if he weren't a Biden, he likely would have been charged with more serious crimes. He would have been charged with tax evasion instead of a simple misdemeanor charge of failing to file taxes. And there's certainly prosecutorial discretion comes into play in everything, but when it continually happens time after time after time again, you do begin not just to wonder, but you begin to suspect that bias is coming into play here. You know, if you flip a coin 10,000 times, theoretically you would get 5,000 heads and 5,000 tails. And if you were to flip a coin 10 times in a row and get heads, would you think that the chances would be increased on the 11th flip? Would you think that the chance of it turning up tails would be better than 50-50 since you just got 10 heads in a row? No, it wouldn't. But I tell you, if you flipped a coin 10,000 times and you got 10,000 heads, it could happen, but the odds against it are very long. When all the prosecution is being leveled against President Trump and his allies, and minimal prosecution is being leveled against President Biden and his allies, I think it's fair to ask. I think it's fair to point this out. It's fair to suspect that bias is coming into play. I don't think that's unreasonable at all.
Bill, you hit the nail on the head just then. There is certainly bias going on with how they are treating Biden versus how they're treating Trump. And I think that the Department of Justice has very serious problems. We've learned that from these whistleblowers where we read the testimony from it last week, and there are real problems going on. That brings us to our call to action for the week. Last Friday and over the weekend, we asked our supporters of Tea Party Patriots Action if they wanted us to call for the impeachment of President Joe Biden. And the answer overwhelmingly by over 90% is that they do want us to call for his impeachment. We're working on that call to action where you can sign a petition and make phone calls to Congress and make it very, very simple for you. That will be ready late tomorrow afternoon or the very latest on Wednesday morning. So we'll have all of that set up for you on Tuesday and Wednesday of this week. In the meantime, there are a few more very important calls to action that we need to be going over. The first one is we are continuing to call for the impeachment of Attorney General Merrick Garland. And this morning, Kevin McCarthy said that the House would be proceeding with that in some manner. He said that on Fox and Friends. So that goes in line with the call to action we've previously had and continue to have for calling for the impeachment of Merrick Garland. Next, we are urging everyone to support Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. We've been doing this for several weeks, and I anticipate that we are going to have to continue to do this for the coming weeks and months. So we have a call to action for that, where you're calling your senators and letting your senators know that we support Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. And frankly, we need this witch hunt on the entire Supreme Court to end. It is a very dangerous place where many people in the public right now are going, and where the liberal senators may wind up taking this country if they continue down this road. So we need everyone to defend the Supreme Court and let them continue to do their job as the third branch of the government without interference and public trials of opinion and public trials against the Supreme Court justices in the court of the press. So we just really need to defend Clarence Thomas and all of the Supreme Court justices from the attacks that are going on from the outside right now. Otherwise, we're going to go down an even darker and more difficult road in our country. Okay, the next call to action is that we have a new documentary that is out called Surviving Socialism. And we're asking people next week during Independence Day to show this documentary. It's about an hour and a half or so long. Show this documentary to your family and friends and encourage them to watch this documentary as well. It's why I think it helps crystallize and show why we are so strongly standing against socialism and want to stand for liberty and to stand for freedom and to stand for capitalism as well. So check the documentary out. It costs nothing at all to watch it. You just have to enter your email address and then you can watch it for free. And then we want you to share it with other people. So please go watch that documentary and then share it with other people. I think you're going to really like it a lot. And then the final call to action, I believe that is all the calls to action. The final thing that I want to remind you of is that I have started a podcast. It's called The Jenny Beth Show. And we're interviewing people and doing long format interviews once a week. We're releasing those interviews once a week. So in one of the interviews that I most recently had, we interviewed a young lady who is 21 years old, who at 16 transitioned from a girl to a boy, and then she has now since detransitioned and is back to being a girl. It's about an hour and 20 minutes in that particular interview, and it's very, very good. And I encourage you to watch it so that you can understand firsthand from somebody who has gone through this process and come out of the process, the transition and the detransition process, what they go through, what they're thinking, and why she and others like her are fighting so hard to stop this kind of pressure on kids to transition, especially when they can't make informed consent because they don't understand the consequences of what they're doing. Some of the other interviews I've had include people who are running for office, people in Washington, D.C. We interviewed Rosemary Jinks from Numbers USA and also a sheriff from the border, Sheriff Joe Martinez, who is from Del Rio, Texas, and then Rosemary Jinks from Numbers USA, talking about the problems that are happening on the border. Then we got additional names from Sheriff Martinez of other sheriffs he recommended that we interview in Arizona and in other parts of Texas. So I have just completed 2 weeks on the road down at the border, interviewing those people, and we'll be releasing those podcast episodes in the coming weeks. And it'll be interviews with 4 more sheriffs plus a ride along with Border Patrol. So be sure to check out the Jenny Beth Show. And with that, we'll go ahead and close out this session. Be sure to give it a thumbs up and to share it with your Facebook friends so other people know what the update from Washington is, and they know how to turn their passion, their frustration, their concern, their anger, their love for America into productive action. Thank you so much. I'm Jenny Beth Martin with Tea Party Patriots Action.